Good morning, buenos dias. First of all, allow me to congratulate Roger Platt, the US Green Building Council, and all the nationals and World Green Building Council for the excellent work you have done and the inspiration you provided to others, and all the other entities working on green building and sustainable building. I will try from my side to put it back in the context that we had at the world level, global level, with its regional and national implications, looking at challenges and opportunities, hoping that at the end, all together, we can be stronger to deliver the vision we are aiming at. Oh, this one? You have a special? Okay. For the people who have been following the discussion on sustainable development for the last more than 20 years, there has been at least some consistency in the UN system, which is not very common sometimes, even though I should not say I'm UN staff. We have been consistent in the way we're looking at the priorities, the overarching priorities for sustainable development. More and more, and it's now very clear, the top priority is poverty eradication, not just in developing countries, it's also in the suburb of the big cities in developed countries. Second one is really managing the natural resources, which are the base of economic and social development. So we should not destroy them if we want to have economic and social development. And the third one, which was a surprise, it took time to be built up. And we still have some difficulties in many countries to explain how this works and how this should be mainstream in the national policies, is changing first our unsustainable and then promote the sustainable patterns of consumption and production. And working on green building and sustainable building is exactly an issue of consumption and production. Which one should I use, this one or the other? Okay, this doesn't work. Why we came to be interested not only in sustainable building, but the overall issue of consumption and production. Many of you should recall the fourth report of IPCC that said very clearly in one of the diagrams that if there is an area where we have low-hanging fruits, where we can really work and do change, it's in the building sector. Yet we have not been doing it. Now let us look at the context where we are today. We're talking about climate change. We have COP21 next year in Paris, hoping to get a new agreement. Still, some people talk about 2 degrees. We know that it gets more unrealistic. We have to go to 3 degrees. People talk about more than that. We have destroyed by more than 60% the base of our ecosystem, and we're going on, even though a lot of people are warning us, we cannot continue like that. We're extracting material because we need buildings, we need roads, we need infrastructure, we need to consume. We're extracting as much as we can from Earth, as if it was unlimited. And we keep on consuming. And as of today, we have the middle class that is known to be the one the most wasteful, because the poor still have to face up and satisfy their basic needs. And the middle class is growing throughout the world. And we expect in the next 20 years, 25 years, 2 to 3 billion middle class consumers. If those consumers, which are my son and the son of my son, the same in your case, if those consumers do consume like a middle class consumer in Europe or in Sao Paulo or in Shanghai, if this trend continues for the next 20 years, we're going to hell. We cannot survive. It's impossible. So we need to take action and try to see in an intelligent manner how to move on. When we started discussing at Rio in 92, they have highlighted from a negative perspective the unsustainable patterns of consumption and production. It was put there, matter of lot of discussions, but we didn't know really how to handle this. About 10 years of thinking, and it came in Johannesburg, where they said, no, we need seriously to consider how to move to sustainability, sustainable consumption and production, and they asked us to work on what they call to prepare for a 10-year framework of program on sustainable consumption and production. We got a mandate to pilot, to demonstrate in all regions, to have a bottom-up approach, discussing in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, in Europe, in all regions, what does it mean for you, sustainable consumption production? How can we do it in buildings, in tourism, in lifestyle, in education, and in procurement, and so on? We have been trying to understand all together that doing more with less does make sense. It can be done. We have the intelligence, we have some knowledge, and we have the technology to move on. This work that we have been doing with all the region have been strong enough to convince the global community to approve at last meeting in Rio 2 years ago, what we call now the 10-year framework of program on sustainable consumption and production. It is not a small issue, and I draw your attention on that. This is the only thing that has been agreed at Rio +20. Even the governments who approved it have not realized that. In the outcome document of Rio of 53 pages, you have only one paragraph which starts by "we adopt." And so the governments are now accountable to report to the General Assembly on how we are moving on sustainable consumption and production. And the countries progressively now are having national strategies for sustainable consumption and production. The difficulty is that there is no ministry working on consumption and production. You have different ministries, and the interest of it is that it will become an opportunity for interministerial coordination within a government. And as it is a multi-stakeholder approach, it will push the government, if not oblige the government, to work with the other stakeholders, private sector, civil society, and so on. The main objective of this 10-year framework of program, as we call it now, the 10 YFP, we would like to have another name, but we should ask the young generation for a competition to help us with that. It's not a sexy term, but that's what we have today. Its main objective is learning from our 10 years of experience and see how we can accelerate the shift towards sustainable consumption and production in all countries, knowing that it's a common but differentiated approach. You will approach consumption, sustainable consumption, differently if you are a poor person or in a poor community or a middle class or the healthy in other countries. The principle is the same: do more with less, more and better with less, but put it in the right context for that, through resource efficiency and decoupling economic growth, which means we're not telling the people do not consume. We're not telling them do not grow. We're telling them consume differently, keep on growing, let your economy grow, but by using less resources and having less environmental impact. It is feasible, it's economic feasible, it makes good business case. But of course for that, you need the right capacity building, a technical assistance to the countries and the different stakeholders, because once they have understood that, they will tell you, okay, now how to do it. I don't know how to do it. I don't have access to technologies. I don't have access to resources and so on. And then we need to put the right information accessible to all different stakeholders to see how we can move on that. This 10-year framework of program is first, it's an intergovernmental process, so it's first to support the government, but other stakeholders. And we have been very careful about that, insisting with governments that it's not only an issue for them, it's all for all stakeholders if they want their policies to be well implemented. And we're working on a series of target indicators, goal target indicators on that. We do have this intergovernmental mandate. It's the first time that we have buildings and cities at the highest level in the UN being considered. They were always left for the other stakeholders. By working together, we do expect to have the collective impact in order to be able to scale up and work really with those implementation teams. The national needs and priorities that were well identified, as I said from the beginning, will respond really to a need for coherent and cost-effective manner on how to handle these issues. And by saving resources, would it be material, financial resources, we'll be able to identify additional resources for something else and bring other additional resources that could be useful to implement through a series of partnerships. Why in this context we're talking about buildings? As I said in the beginning, the IPCC report has been very clear. And a way to keep in mind, and you know about it, we have all the statistics, 40%, 30%, 25%, 60% of electricity in buildings. We can keep as an order of magnitude. The building sector is the industry of the one-thirds. Broadly speaking, 1/3 of energy consumption, 1/3 of emission, 1/3 of waste, and so on, even though it can move by 5% here and there. It gives us, in terms of magnitude, the importance of the building sector. But at the same time, we see from one of the slides that I showed you before with the 2 to 3 billion additional middle-class consumers, the quantity of material that we are extracting. And if the total extraction material has been multiplied by 8-fold in 15 years, for the construction material, it grew by a factor of 34. So the general material is 8, and just construction material is 34. It shows the tremendous impact it's having on the exploitation of the resources. And this diagram confirms what I said in terms of the magnitude, but the complexity of the building sector, that we cannot just take the building as it is, as when we have started ourselves or others are doing, look just at the building. The building is an element of a process. It's part of a chain. So it has a complex life cycle, large number of actors that usually are not sitting together. The growth of resources, as I said, the factor 34 is enormous compared to other things. It cannot be a trend scenario. We have to look for alternatives. And this has an impact on the prices of the commodities everywhere. Why it moved very well with Roger Platt and not with me? This variety of actors, we have here a list of them throughout the supply chain. You maybe can add more. It's kind of shopping list. But all these have a role throughout the supply chain of a building, from the extraction of the material to the destruction and the reuse of the material. And they need to be associated at some point in order to be able to effectively talk and implement what we call green building and sustainable building. But there are many barriers on the way, and because of the barriers, people don't get in and they prefer to refrain and sit back. The policy framework that we have are not right. And Roger have mentioned the time it took them to move from 4 states in the US to much more states, and still there is not a federal policy on that. And in other countries, you might have a policy, but still it's not the right one, not properly framed, not inducing the people to move on. The responsibilities between the stakeholders are not well defined. Procurement requirements are not explicit about how to green building or look at sustainability. The market is not so ready, and so on and so forth, and you can move further on that. These are the different stakeholders, and most of the time, each one of them sits in his square and does his work and pass it over to the next. The challenge is to see to what extent we can bring those different stakeholders at one point to speak together. If not all together, a small group, a second group, but it's extremely important that we do create the relation between them to see the respective impact and responsibilities if we want throughout the supply chain to deliver green building, sustainable building. So in the broader picture here, we need absolutely to care about the interlinkages. The building, as I said, alone, of course, is of interest, but it has to be put in its broader picture and through a life cycle. And there are a certain number of entry points that will allow us really to get in. Would it be technology, tools, policies, on which you are all working, either by bits and pieces or commonly, but it's try to see how all together we can put this and move further on that. In order to be able to have these new tools and new products, there's a lot of possibility for innovation in this. And government services need to be revised in order effectively to handle seriously the issue of water, waste, transport, and all these are related to a building. A building alone implies transport, implies roads, implies water, it will have compact and waste. All this has to be included in the picture through interlinkages. So, of course, as United Nations Environment Programme, we are not here to reinvent the wheel, but we are trying here to see, by being a catalyzer, by offering a platform, how we can add value, how we can bring different stakeholders, telling them, please leave your hat and your business outside, come and we discuss for a common approach, common understanding, and how to move further on that. So we do recognize all the excellent work done elsewhere. We just try to see how we can bring some value added, put the different stakeholders, and work together. And this will replies to the huge demand for homes. There will be a huge demand. And as you know, 90% of the buildings for the next 30, 50 years are not yet done in the third countries. They will have to be built. So better to do it right. Otherwise, we will not have the capacity to retrofit in 30 years all these buildings or the money for this issue. So the market is not ready yet. We have to see how we can ensure the transformation of the market through the multiplicity of good practices that we have all around the world. The next two slides, I'll go quick on them. They are all alone matter of 2 hours presentation, but looking at the right enabling framework, making sure that sustainable building and construction is not just about green and energy efficiency, it's overall about resource efficiency and sustainability by bringing this dialogue, ensuring that we do have a common language that we do not have yet. As much as it applies to sustainability, it applies to green building and sustainable building. The common language is not there. We don't have a tool that will allow us worldwide to understand or to measure what is a green building and sustainable building. It requires this necessary life cycle approach based on resource efficiency, looking first at simple rules and guidance in order to measure performance. But we need really to make sure that the building there takes into account the infrastructure, not just implying infrastructure, but fit in the infrastructure we have and then develop it as per the demand. Have to be as much as possible and resource positive. I mean, we can do things, and when we look at the city level, you'll have a next slide later on that shows how much we can work on urban mining in order to ensure that we do not just bring additional resources, do with what we have and work with, use less energy than produce and so on. And the circular economy approach applies very well to the building sector as much as it applies to the city level. When we talk about sustainable building, of course, we should look at what we are doing so far, looking at homes. Most of the work that is being now done with the rating systems applies to commercial, institutional, and public buildings, not so much to homes in general. And this is the critical mass of building that we will have. And we need to insert and to integrate sustainability parameters in the huge amount, the big stock of existing and the huge amount of house to be built there. So we need people to be well informed, well engaged. They have also, of course, to consider the climate, but not only from the adaptation perspective, from a mitigation by preventing, preparing is an extremely important issue. Energy efficiency, resource efficiency is critical in this, and try to see how we can get really a proper MRV system to move further. And government here, and that's where we are happy to see that it has been taken so high at the level of the General Assembly. Government have to lead by example with the huge amount of public entities, universities, schools, and so on. They can lead by example and ensure that we are moving further on that. In the 10-year framework of program, there has been a certain number of programs, as you see from the title, that has been adopted there. We have programs on sustainable public procurement, sustainable lifestyle and education, sustainable tourism, consumer information, sustainable building and construction, and food systems. And all of them are interrelated. Just here briefly, I want to present you the Sustainable Building Program on which we are working today, for which we are looking for 3-4 co-leads selected from different stakeholders with about 20 members of a multi-stakeholder advisory committee that will help us lead this program based on what has achieved, looking for value added through synergies, through additional work, and so on. And this is your program. This is the opportunity you have to take this agenda at the highest level. So help us to implement, to join us in that. We will be looking after what has been identified and done over the last 10 years, looking at the enabling framework, supporting the social housing, because there will be a huge demand for social housing. Focus on that, ensure that we have a minimum sustainability criteria, look resource efficiency throughout the supply chain, reduce climate by mainly looking at climate mitigation in the sky, and knowledge sharing, which is extremely important. We know, but we don't know enough, and we need to make sure that it's accessible. So today there are a variety of initiatives all around there. SBCI, Sustainability and Climate Initiative, that is organizing this event, the National Green Building Council, the World Building Council, the national government, the private sector institution. What we want to make sure is by joining forces, we can have a coherent puzzle that will help us to deliver seriously this program and come to a second level of delivery. Now, let me move to what I call from the tree to the forest very quickly. A building alone, of course, it's a case study, but the building has to be put in its context within the city. And there you have the infrastructure, the water, all the issues that are going around. As I said, I talked about the industry of the 1/3 for the buildings. The cities can be categorized as the industry of the 3/4. 3/4 in terms of population, resource use, CO2 emission, and waste in the next 20 years. So it's vital to really focus properly on the cities. The building can be a driving force as much as it can be on transport. It's clear now that there cannot be sustainability without city, if not at city level, and they are really the hub for innovation. But how to approach the cities exactly in the same way as we're talking about sustainable building and with the different stakeholders. Resource efficiency at city level is, for us, a new way to enter in the management of cities, to allow the mayors and the government to manage the city, look at the urban planning from a sustainable consumption and production perspective. The city is the box you have in the middle. The arrows are the amount of resources we need to import in a city, depending on the standard that you have in the city. How many poor, how many middle class, how many rich, how much they will be progressing, looking at those resources. Where are you going to import them? Look at the supply chain and try to improve in the process how to improve energy efficiency and resource efficiency through all these sectors. But then once they are in the city, and depending how good you are in the management, reuse them to the maximum, apply circular economy in the city so that you export a minimum of waste, if not no waste at all. So managing a city like if it was an enterprise, as any CEO in an enterprise who is keen or looking at the quality of his workers to keep them happy, but to have his enterprise productive and living there for a long time. But with all the work we have been doing so far, we have a good knowledge, but we don't have enough knowledge, or the knowledge is not accessible to all, not accessible in a usable manner or in a understandable manner. So it's important that we really assess what do we know and how we're going to implement it, make sure that it fits with the consumption and production patterns, and develop as much as possible public-private partnership to work together on that. I will let you read this one. It could have been written 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 100 years ago. It's actual. Look at it. It's our problem. This is 2,200 years ago. So, since 2,200 years ago, we're saying the same thing. Of course, it was in a more limited context, but the problem is still there. And we keep on doing the same with the growing population, complexifying the problem. So it's important and urgent with the modern technology or the knowledge we have today that we do change the issues. Finally, There is a lot of legislation. We're talking about a certification system with voluntary, but you really have the right policy framework. You need market incentives. You need the right instrument to move on. You need to have market readiness to go on issue. And usually we stop there. We say, okay, we inform. I believe that legislation and market instrument are just 50%. And probably that's why we're not progressing much. Because we don't give enough attention to the right information, to the right people, a targeted information, and then enabling the people to effectively work together. This is what I call the sticks and carrots. We all know about it. Let us put the tambourine, which is making noise and allowing people to work together for a common goal. So it's extremely important to make sure, to ensure that whatever is being done is known, translated in for targeted people, for a policymaker, for a minister, for a mayor, for the business person, for young, in a different messages so they can understand it, implement it for a common goal. So, are we moving as quickly as we should? No, no, no. That's clear. But, as I said, it's up to us. And we have the means. We cannot just hide behind it. We do have the means, you have the means, all the stakeholders have the means. But would we be intelligent enough and responsible enough to do so? I leave the question open. Thank you very much.